Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought, of course, that I would talk about the matchup and the U.S. Open final that most recently ended up happening. Of course, between that and Mr. Novak Djokovic, the Serbian champion, who, of course, before this match was a 23-time Grand Slam champion. And of course, Daniil Medvedev, who is a one-time Grand Slam champion. Now, this U.S. Open final, in my view, was important for a multitude of reasons. Not only, of course, was it going to be a chance for history for Mr. Novak Djokovic because, it would have been his 24th Grand Slam title, meaning that he would have tied up with that of Margaret Court for the most amount of Grand Slam titles within that of history, out of anyone within tennis history, at least within that of the Open era. Now, maybe within that of the pre-Open era, there may have been someone with that of more Grand Slams or more titles. But in my view, I'm not quite sure if I can really count those titles in completion because that era was a little bit different, meaning that they could play a little bit against amateurs and a little bit more against players. Maybe I'd have to do a little bit more research on it, but at least from what I've seen and what I've researched, it seems like they were able to play against certain players that would seem a little bit less qualified. But maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe I'd have to do a little bit more research. Anyways, after this matchup, of course, for those of you that did not end up seeing the matchup, Mr. Novak Djokovic was able to prevail once again. He was able to win his 24th Grand Slam, not only making history, but in my view, once again showing a very impressive amount of mettle and gall and mental toughness and fortitude within that of his character and within that of his career. Daniil Medvedev, of course, was able to beat Novak Djokovic within that of the U.S. Open a couple years ago in the 2021 U.S. Open within that of 3 sets. I don't even believe that Novak Djokovic won one set in that final. And it was very clear in my view that all the way back in 2021, that Novak Djokovic was feeling a lot of pressure in that final because if he had won that final, he would have completed that of the calendar slam. And he wanted to complete that of the Golden Slam, I believe, something that Steffi Graf has only done, at least from what I remember. If another player did do it, then let me know. But I think from what I remember, the only player within recent years, which of course was, when I say recent years, probably about 30 years ago now, was when Steffi Graf did it somewhere in the 90s, I believe. That means that she won all four Grand Slams of that year, and on top of that, won the gold medal in that of the Olympics. So that certainly was a great achievement. Unfortunately for Mr. Novak Djokovic, all the way back in 2021, for whatever reason, he's not done particularly well, at least, not exceptionally well within that of the Olympics. And then the U.S. Open, it also has been a little bit underwhelming in terms of his most recent performances. Of course, just a few years back, he ended up getting disqualified against that Spanish player because he ended up kind of throwing a ball or hitting a ball and it accidentally hit a line judge. Then, of course, he lost the final to Daniil Medvedev, and then there was another time where he was eliminated against Stan Wawrinka. And then, of course, last year he was eliminated because of a vaccine. With that bullshit. So, it is what it is. So Novak Djokovic has had quite a journey, especially within this past decade. But Novak Djokovic has certainly, in my view, not only been the most dominant player and proven to be the most skilled and best player of the past 10 plus years, but in my view, when you talk about the greatest tennis player of all time, I always thought that it was Novak Djokovic in terms of his skill set and in terms of his dominance and mental toughness. But even when you start talking about accomplishments, you have to put Novak Djokovic at the top ahead over anybody, in my view. That means over Roger Federer. That means over Rafael Nadal. That means over that of Rod Laver, Ken Rosewall, anyone that you want to put up there. And I don't really mix men's and women's, so I'm not really going to bring up Margaret Court or Serena Williams or Steffi Graf. But even if you were going to interject them into the conversation, yes, in my view, Novak Djokovic is ahead of those guys as well. Or those girls, excuse me. He's ahead of any one of those tennis players, in my personal view. When you talk about the all around complete game, you can debate that Novak Djokovic is the most intelligent tennis player out of all those guys. You can debate that he is the most skilled out of all those guys and the most talented. And he certainly would debatably be the most accomplished within the shortest amount of time. At least one certainly could debate. Novak Djokovic now has 24 Grand Slams. And just to talk about the matchup and some of the finals this year, there really has been a great amount of finals. The first set, of course, Novak Djokovic was decently dominant against that over Daniil Medvedev. Novak Djokovic, when you talk about that first set over over Daniil Medvedev, to be quite honest with you, just in my personal view, it probably was the best set in terms of a Grand Slam final that he played throughout the whole entire year. Now, of course, I didn't really get to watch the French Open final, the Roland Garros final, against that of Casper Ruud, but he was so sharp in that first set. He was hitting it perfectly on the line. His serve was right there. It was very quick. It was very sharp. He clearly was very domineering and was out to send a message to Daniil Medvedev in the first set, and he beat him 6-3. However, that second set between Mr. Novak Djokovic and Daniil Medvedev, it was a crazy set. There was a lot of up and downs for both players. Neither player really got that much of a break point until that of the tiebreak, where, of course, Novak Djokovic, by the skin of his teeth, was able to pull out a tiebreak, I believe 7-5. And had that been any other player in the world besides maybe Rafael Nadal at his best or Carlos Alcaraz, but even Carlos Alcaraz, Daniil Medvedev was able to get the tiebreak over Carlos Alcaraz because Daniil Medvedev did end up beating Carlos Alcaraz, the new kid on the block, the new, hot stuff, within that of tennis. And he is, in my view, going to be the next best thing in that of tennis for the next 10 plus years. He clearly is the next all-time great in my view. Maybe there will be some others, but we'll have to see. Holger Rune or Benjamin Shelton, whoever else might be there. But, he was able to beat Carlos Alcaraz within that of 4 sets. He was very impressive in that. And the reason why he beat Carlos Alcaraz is because, first of all, he was not afraid to exchange with him. And when I say exchange with him, I don't really mean exchange with him. I mean that he was not afraid to hit winners against Carlos Alcaraz. And the way that Novak Djokovic was playing in this final, I thought that it was very apparent and very clear that he was kind of prepared to face that of Carlos Alcaraz because a lot of the moves, in my opinion, that Novak Djokovic would have had to have done against Carlos Alcaraz, he was doing in this matchup, meaning that his net play was exceptional within this matchup. And to beat someone like a Carlos Alcaraz, you have to have that of a great net game. You have to have a great net game. You have to cut him off, kind of a little bit shorter up close to that of the net. You can't let him hit winners all the time. He's too strong, he's too powerful, and he has too quick a feet. And on top of that, if Novak Djokovic were against Carlos Alcaraz in this final, Carlos Alcaraz, he's clearly younger. He's 19 years old. Novak Djokovic, he's 36 years old. So there's a 17-year age difference there. It just is what it is. Even in this matchup, you could tell that Novak Djokovic, that the age is starting to affect him a little bit. It's not, as bad as when, Serena Williams, you could clearly tell within the last year, that it's affecting her, or Roger Federer within his last year. But you can tell that Novak Djokovic, and I'm not going to say that, maybe he does not have a chance at 30 Grand Slams, but if I were to bet on it, just in my personal view, would I see Novak Djokovic winning 3 out of the 4 Grand Slams next year? More than likely not. And the reason why I say that is because with Carlos Alcaraz around and Daniil Medvedev seemingly catching up just by a little bit, and some of these players, I'm not really sure if they're catching up to Djokovic just because they're getting used to him or because he's just getting a little bit older. Because like I said, this Grand Slam, that first set, in my view, it was the most dominant set that I had seen Novak Djokovic play in this whole entire year in terms of a Grand Slam final. It was probably the most dominant out of any other set that I had seen him play. And of course, he was pretty dominant in the first set against Carlos Alcaraz in the Wimbledon, but of course, he ended up losing that matchup. And Novak Djokovic in the Wimbledon, he probably should have won that one. He kind of blew away the second set, and he also kind of blew away that of the fifth set, but I don't think he expected Carlos Alcaraz. I don't think he expected him to fight back for every single point like he did. Novak Djokovic has never really met a player like that before, to where even Roger Federer and Rafael Nadal, as great of players as what they are, I don't think that he ever met a player like that to where he fought back literally tooth and nail for every point, just like he did, Mr. Novak Djokovic did once upon a time and still does. I don't think he was expecting a player like that of a Carlos Alcaraz overall to really be like that. But that just goes to show you that the new generation is finally coming. And these players like Tsitsipas and Medvedev and Dominic Thiem and, some of these other guys, some of the other guys that I may not be mentioning, they're very good players, but, they're probably not meant to be all-time great players. They might be great players. Now, in terms of Daniil Medvedev, in my view, he is a great player. He's going to go down as one of the all-time great gatekeepers, and every sport has one of those players. In boxing, it was Miguel Cotto. during that of the 2000s and 2010s, where if you were anywhere below that of a Floyd Mayweather or a Manny Pacquiao or a Saul Canelo Alvarez, meaning that if you did not have a debate as the potential number one pound for pound fighter, that more than likely, he was going to lose to you. But if you were anywhere below that type of level, Miguel Cotto would have a great chance in beating you, even potentially if you were a little bit bigger than him. When we talk about the UFC, there are guys like Dustin Poirier. There are guys like, if I was going to compare, someone else, I'm trying to think about it. Maybe even Max Holloway, if you want to call him that. Of course, he was a champion, but in some of his other greater fights, like against Volkanovski and Poirier, he lost. Maybe, even some other fighters, Cyril Gane, certain guys like that. But there's always great gatekeeper players or great keeper, athletes, or competitors, in every single sport. Daniil Medvedev, he's one of those guys to where if you're not on that Rafa Nadal, Novak Djokovic, or Carlos Alcaraz level, he's more than likely going to beat you because he has a high level of skill. He's very lengthy. He's a guy that's 6'6", and I bet you has probably quite a bit of reach. And Novak Djokovic was having a hell of a time in that second set. I thought Daniil Medvedev was doing a great job really putting Novak Djokovic on the ropes. And unfortunately for Daniil Medvedev, he made a couple of mental errors and just kind of blew it within that of the second set and allowed Novak Djokovic to get back in the game, not only to tie it 6-6, to get to the tiebreak, but in the tiebreak, of course, once upon a time, I believe it was 4-5 in favor of Medvedev, and then Novak Djokovic, I believe, ended up winning that of the next 3 points. If I'm wrong about that, someone correct me. But those last 2 points, those were very, very crucial, of course, because that's what won Novak Djokovic the set. But after that second set, because it was so grueling, and Novak Djokovic showed a lot of signs of physical weakness and tiredation, when it came down to it, he was breathing very heavily, and it was clear that his legs were giving out on him a little bit just because of the amount of volleying that was happening in that match. I mean, there were certain times where they would volley the ball and it wouldn't get ended until about 20 or 30 hits later. So it was very clear that both of these guys that, the exhaustion was going to set in, but it looked like from Novak Djokovic that the exhaustion was setting in even more for him, which is not something that we usually see. Now maybe it's because, someone hasn't really pushed him quite this far, in a very long time. Or maybe he's just getting old. Maybe he's just getting old. Maybe a little bit of both. So, we'll see what ends up happening next. But, of course, congratulations to Mr. Novak Djokovic. But after that second set, once Novak Djokovic won a set that probably should have went to Daniil Medvedev, that game was over. And I'm not going to say that Daniil Medvedev, that he didn't try to fight back in that of the third set. He did. He was still making it relatively competitive. He even got a break point, I believe, over Novak Djokovic. But Djokovic, I think, got about 2 or 3 within that of the final set. He certainly got 2. So once that second break point happened, Novak Djokovic pretty much, he had, his fangs around that of Daniil Medvedev's jugular. That was pretty much about it for that. But anyways, when it comes down to it, congratulations on Mr. Novak Djokovic for winning his 24th Grand Slam. Now what is next for both of these guys? What is next for Novak Djokovic? We'll see, once again, if he can win the ATP Masters. We'll see if he can do that. Of course, it's not going to be easy with guys like Carlos Alcaraz or Daniil Medvedev about, but he can potentially do it. Who knows? Maybe Casper Ruud will even surprise a couple of people if he's able to win it. I don't predict that he will, but we'll see what ends up happening. We'll see. He might win, potentially the most amount of trophies, singles titles within the next couple of years. I wouldn't be surprised. I would have to see how many tournaments that he is going to compete in. But if I have a guess, more than likely, not only is Novak Djokovic going to try to go for that record, he's going to probably try to really potentially go for that of 30 Grand Slams. And I think that he may have a chance at it. I don't think that he's going to really reach it, just in my personal view, because he's already shown a little bit of a slight sign of aging. I thought that it was very clear once again that in all of his Grand Slam matchups this year that even though he was very competitive, even against the best of the best, against Daniil Medvedev and Carlos Alcaraz, he has lost probably about a half a step. He's a little bit slower, in my opinion. He gets a little bit more tired in certain situations, and he's having a little bit of more problems keeping up with the pace, and that's how you know they're somewhat nearing the end of their prime. So Novak Djokovic, in my view, if I had to guess, just in my personal view, I think that he's going to have one more year, maybe 2 more years of legitimately having a great chance of winning the majority of the Grand Slams. But I think that if we're talking about winning 3 out of 4 of the Grand Slams, Novak Djokovic might have 1 year of those years. I don't think that he's going to do any more after that in terms of winning the majority of the Grand Slams the years after that. He still might win some, and who knows, he might potentially get to 30. But I would not predict that. I would say that Novak Djokovic, that he has a real potential chance of possibly reaching 27 or 26. 2025 at the very least in my personal view, because I do expect him to win the Australian Open. But we'll see, because next year, once again, it's going to be very interesting to see where Novak Djokovic goes from there. I don't really know where he's going to go. He is the number one player, or he is going to be, I believe, within that of next week, because not only did he win the tournament, but Carlos Alcaraz was eliminated. But it's going to be very interesting, because I don't know where Novak Djokovic is going to go from here. I don't know if he has another 2 or 3 years, and if he's actually going to get the 30 Grand Slams and break the all-time singles titles record, or if next year he's not going to look like the same player, because you never know with certain athletes. They can be like a Tom Brady and, kind of last a little bit longer, or they can, break down to 36, 37 years old. Novak Djokovic has already lasted quite a bit. He's been through a lot of wars. He's been through a lot of turmoil. And in my view, had it not been for the COVID-19 vaccine bullshit, the martial law, and other stuff like that, and the Wimbledon being canceled in 2020, Novak Djokovic right now, at the very least, would have 26 Grand Slams, because he would have another Australian Open title and another Wimbledon title, in my view. Not even a doubt about it. Now the U.S. Open, I'm not quite so sure about. But if it were not for other certain circumstances, Novak Djokovic would have 26 Grand Slams. Now, just for the final part of the video, what do I believe that winning this 24th Grand Slam also means for Novak Djokovic? Do I believe that this clearly makes him the greatest tennis player of all time? I think that he's been there debatably in the conversation, but now that he's tied up with the most amount of Grand Slams, I don't think that there's really much debate just because of the statistics. Novak Djokovic is pretty much the Floyd Mayweather or the Michael Jordan or the Tom Brady of his sport, where he pretty much leads in almost every single category. And not just does he almost just lead in every single category, but in terms of talent, in terms of intelligence, and in terms of clutch playing ability, you would have to debate that Novak Djokovic is probably on the top of every single one of those lists when you just talk about talent and his playing ability and his clutch ability and his mental fortitude, and his accomplishments. Novak Djokovic has a debate as being number one on every single one of those lists, especially within the amount of time that he's done it. Now, once again, the next records to go for Mr. Novak Djokovic are the all-time singles records and a certain amount of other stuff like that. So we'll see where he goes from here. It's going to be very interesting to see if he can go for the all-time ATP record, finals, or for the all-time finals record for the ATP Tour, or if he's going to beat Jimmy Connors and Roger Federer. I think that he can potentially do it, but we'll see what happens. Anyways, that's pretty much about it. We'll see what happens. But Novak Djokovic, not only in my view does he have a great debate as being the greatest tennis player, but being up there with Michael Jordan, Tom Brady, and whoever else you want to put up there in terms of the greatest athlete of all time, in my view, he is up there. They were debating Rafael Nadal and Roger Federer and Serena Williams there, so in my view, they should debate Novak Djokovic there as well, especially since he is more accomplished than those players. But we'll see what happens next. Anyways, that's pretty much about it for today. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to y'all later.